So today I want to talk to you a little bit about having faith and having hope. So sometimes people will object to religion because they say that there's no logical reason for believing in God, and in fact, the word for believing in God isn't even trust or reassurance. It's faith, and so people seem to think that having faith is illogical and there's no real reason to beyond you know having the hope of eternal life, and so it's sort of a mechanism um against death anxiety. And I think that's a very fatal view of religion, because the reason that we have to have faith, and so um really what I'm referring to is faith while you're in the desert. So that was our last lecture, having faith in the desert. And again, the desert is the place where you're lost, you're wondering, you're trying to find your way, your frame of perception, the means by which you assign meaning and value to the world has collapsed, and it needs to be reconstructed after you face this um, new manifestation of the unknown, which is the desert symbolically. And so while you're there, you need to maintain hope and faith. And well, so firstly, hope and faith in what? Um, Really in the structure of reality itself. And one of the great things that the Genesis creation account does is, firstly, it doesn't just outline the material creation of the world, it outlines you could say, the metaphysical creation of the world. So it's the creation of that frame of perception, and the emphasis on almost every single day. I think every single day, but at least most of them, is that the creation of this world, of this means by which we experience the world, is good. And so, but not just good, it's also intelligible. So it's not arbitrary, it's not random, it didn't happen by chance, it was purposeful, meaningful, and it occurred with intent. And so because of that, we can have hope and faith in the very structure of reality itself. And so what I kind of want to introduce you to is, you have material laws of the universe. So you have the law of the conservation of matter, the law of definite proportions, these material laws that govern matter. And you have physics, all these things that govern matter. They're mostly true, except for arguably at the beginning, and evolutionarily speaking, at the Big Bang. But pretty much all after that, they've been at work, and you can't really break them. Well, there are laws beyond that. There are laws in you could say, the metaphysical domain or the religious domain. There's religious laws, moral laws. And these laws can be broken, unlike, you could say, material laws, which can't really be broken. The thing is, though, is that you cannot break these laws without experiencing consequences. And so, but the laws go both ways. There's laws that say do not do this, or else this bad thing is going to happen to you. But there's also do this, or else these bad things are going to happen to you. But there's also do this so that good things happen to you. And so the law isn't just so that we stop doing things that have negative consequences. The law is also there to give us a mode of being that's going to produce a genuinely desirable outcome, not in the short term and not just for ourselves, but in the long term, the medium to long term, and for the world at large. And so what you're having hope and faith in is that such a moral structure of the universe actually exists. And one of the things that you're doing when you go on the hero's journey is you are placing your faith in the very structure of the moral reality of the universe, and the hopes that if you sacrifice, that it's true that if you sacrifice everything in the proper orientation, then you will get back the same and some. And that's faith because there's no real evidence that that's true. There's no scientific evidence, for example, that that's true. The laws of morality are not based on scientific study. So you have to go and you have to live it out yourself to find out if it's true. And that's the thing about religion, is it's not, you can't scientifically prove religion. It's not something that you observe about the material world. It's something that you do, that you act out. It's an experience. It's an event. It's a journey. It's an adventure. And that's what gives your life meaning. And so that's why you have to have hope and faith. And so now what I want to talk about is really what it is that you're hoping for um in this journey. And one of the things that you should be looking forward to is a meaning beyond that of evil and suffering. People will say, oh, what's the meaning to life, is a very popular question. The problem is that there is at least a meaning to life. So the question isn't what's the meaning to life. The question is, which is the meaning of life, or which is the ultimate meaning of life. And so something that's very apparent that we treat as meaningful is evil and suffering, death, those sorts of things, pain. We treat these things as if they're meaningful, and actually they are meaningful because, again, pain is your body's way of saying that something is wrong and that something needs to change. Like if you didn't experience pain, then if you like backed up into a cactus or something, I don't know, or if you backed up into a nail, and you didn't feel anything, you had no nerves and there was no pain, then you got up and then you just bled to death, right? So the pain, of course, it hurts, and it's undesirable, but it's like that on purpose because it's telling you stop doing that thing. And so when you're experiencing evil and suffering, then that likely means that you're doing something wrong. Now, that's not always the case, because on the hero's journey, you are going to go through the desert, and you're going to do so willfully if it's the hero's journey. And you're going to experience pain and suffering, and that's because you're experiencing resistance. You're being put in a position where you're uncomfortable. You're fighting a dragon that's so large that it's new, it's different, and you have to act differently. You have to learn something. You have to do different things, and that's why it's so meaningful. That is the process by which life becomes more meaningful than evil and suffering. And so a very common motif is that if somebody willfully goes through evil and suffering, and they come out on the other end, not of losing hope in themselves, or the integrity of themselves, and in the very structure of reality themselves, if they maintain hope, if they maintain faith, then every single time they come out with at least what they had before, but most often they come out with more than they had before. And so, like, even if you're sort of a selfish person, you should want to go on the hero's journey. People who are detrimentally selfish aren't selfish. They're ignorantly selfish. Because the thing is that what's best for you is also what's best for the world at large. So if you do the best thing for yourself, you're also doing the best thing for others. And that's what's really great about the structure of reality, is that it's like life was meant to be. It's like the structure of reality itself was set up in a way that was meaningful, purposeful, and built for life. And now it's not obviously the case. That's why you have to have faith in that. But you can see that when you go into the world, when you face the unknown and you transform it into the order that's good, and you establish something of lasting significance, you're going to realize the inherent goodness of the world. And so that's one of the things that's portrayed in the fall in Genesis chapter 30, and the story of Cain in Genesis chapter 4. In chapters 1 and 2, the world was good. The Garden of Eden was made in such a manner that man was meant for it, and he was to work it, and that work is sacred. But it wasn't toilsome. It wasn't necessarily difficult. It wasn't harsh. And the things that he was working on, tilling the ground, it wasn't resisting against his work. And so everything seemed to be in alignment with each other. And it's only after the fall of mankind that we see the earth resisting man's work, and we see work become toilsome and difficult, and we see death, and we see evil, and we see suffering. And that goes even further in the story of Cain. He rejects his ideal, and he gets cast into the wilderness, and he's wandering there endlessly and suffering. Essentially, it's not implicit in the text that he's suffering, but you can imagine that someone who's lost, who's hesitating, who has no pathway forward, would experience evil and suffering, because you experience emotions in relationship to an aim. And so if you are making progress towards an aim, then you are going to experience positive emotion. But if your progress is hindered, or if you get set back, or if you have no aim at all, then you're going to be experiencing negative emotion. And so a lack of an aim simply means that all you are left with is evil and suffering. And so the only manner in which to overcome evil and suffering is to have an aim, some form of an aim. And it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be, an exact replica of the kingdom of heaven. And so, some people will say, "Oh, I'm waiting to do this thing because I don't fully know, what it is that I'm doing." And it's like, well, fair enough, but you know, trying is better than not doing anything at all. And trying and failing is better than not doing anything at all, because at least if you failed, then you attempted to do something. You had a goal and you moved towards it. And in so doing, you're going to gain experience in whatever domain that is. And the longer you do that, sure, you can have failure after failure after failure, but eventually you're going to gather enough experience, gather enough information, and your aim is going to get better and better and better and better. And eventually you're going to have an aim and a set of behaviors that are actually going to lead to success, and maybe even you'll get a little bit of luck, because sometimes that's required. And but the thing about luck is that you usually only experience it whenever you're truly doing something good. Whenever your aim is truly good, then you get lucky. And so that kind of goes to that idea of like you you create your own luck, essentially, right? I mean, it's almost like God blesses those who are seeking after him. It's almost like God blesses those who are trying to genuinely be good and faithful people. And so, you know, the purpose of this hero's journey is to establish something of lasting significance that goes beyond you, and that is going to simultaneously bring about the meaning that is required to overcome evil and suffering. And so, what exactly is it that overcomes evil and suffering? Well, I think it's something like love and truth. It's the inherent goodness of the world is made manifest. God is made manifest in a positive manner. That's something that we see in the story of Cain and Abel. We see that whenever Abel offers up the proper sacrifice, so what Abel does is he brings the firstborn of his flock. So out of all the animals, he grabs the best animal, the one that would have benefited him the most. And then he goes and he takes the fat portions of it, so he gets the best animal, and then he takes the best cut, and then he offers that up to God. And so it's a firmly established fact that Abel offered up his absolute best to God. He was willing to make the ultimate sacrifice, and because of that, God had favor on Abel. And what that means is that God blessed him. And again, a blessing is like an enzyme for life. It attains, it sustains, and it promotes the growth of life. It's inherently good. And you are blessed not when you ask for a blessing, not necessarily when you even pray to God, does he bless you simply because of that prayer? You become blessed because the structure of reality is built in such a manner in which if you truly aim upward, then you are going to see the inherent goodness of creation. And it's really a great thing to know. It's a great thing to know that there isn't just evil and suffering, that there isn't just pain and endless misery to the world, that there's something beyond that and something maybe way beyond that. And the manner in which that is manifested is not random and it's not arbitrary, but it is linked to your actions and your behaviors and the willingness for you to make the proper sacrifice. And what that inherently means is that in order to have a good life, it isn't luck. People seem to look at rich people and they say, "Oh, well, he got lucky. He won this, or maybe he did it illegally, or maybe he inherited it. Oh, he's rich, but he's lazy, or he whatever. He got lucky. It was all by chance, but." The thing is, nowhere in the Bible is it insisted upon that wealth is a mere chance. Rather, the opposite, actually. What's insisted upon is that at least to a degree, poverty, spiritual poverty, at least, is is your fault. And it might seem like, oh, that's so terrible of a thing to say, but again, what that means is that you're in control. You're in control of the manner in which life reveals itself to you. And it's laid out very clearly in the Bible that if you do not offer up your best, then you are not going to be favored by God. And if you do offer up your best, then you are going to be favored by God. It's made very, very clear. And so I wanna hone in on hope, because again, you can choose the so we're gonna go back to Exodus. You can choose the hero's path. You can choose to go into the desert and to have faith in the structure of reality itself. Now, that doesn't mean that you're all set from then. Okay, it's a one-time sacrifice thing that you do, and then you can just kind of just let that sit and let things happen, and it doesn't really matter what you do after that, and it's going to bring about something good. But that isn't the case. The case it's a continuous sacrifice. You're continuously making the ultimate sacrifice over and over and over again, and so that's another reason why people will reject this pathway, because you have to not only make a one-time sacrifice, which is difficult, and you're giving up something that you're attached to, but that's why it's ultimate and that's why it's meaningful, but you have to continuously do that over and over and over again. And so in the Garden of Eden, there it says that God placed a cherubim um at the end of the garden. And so the garden was the ideal state, and they left that ideal state and went into the desert. And in order to return to that ideal state, they have to go through the sword that turns every which way. And so, at least one interpretation of that sword is that it's cutting away everything that's unholy. And so, what you're doing when you're making a sacrifice, a psychological sacrifice, is you aren't just offering up something that you like, you're offering up yourself. And it's in that manner that we can understand the sacrifices in the Old Testament, the animal sacrifices. They aren't just sacrificing animals. It's a physical manifestation of a psychological sacrifice, right? They're practicing this. Literally, they're acting it out, and they have to act it out in order to truly understand it and get it. And so that's an incredible insistence, at least in the Old Testament, but I would say also in the New Testament, is that it's not just believing these things. It's not just in your mind having hope or in your mind having faith, but it's the acting out of that hope and of that faith in the structure of reality or in God that that is good and that will bring about paradise, or that will bring about the mountaintop that is above the desert and that you're headed towards if you have faith and hope in the future. And so what are you having hope in? Well, you're having hope in the entire structure of reality. Essentially, you're having hope that this isn't going to be worthless, and this isn't going to be a waste, and that God really is with you, and that you really are going to make it through. But again, it's continuous hope. And so one of the things that we see constantly in the Exodus is that the Israelites lose hope in God. And it never goes well, right? Again, the journey from Egypt to the promised land should have been something like a few days, and maybe with all of them, maybe a week, or like at most a month, and that was still if things went a little bit wrong, very wrong. But they don't go for a month or a year or 10 years. They go for 40 years in the wilderness. And the reason that they are in the wilderness that long is because they lose hope. And so I think, at least in the Exodus narrative, one interpretation is that what it's saying is that yes, it's a big sacrifice. It's going to be difficult, but if you maintain hope and if you maintain faith and if you properly worship God, then the journey is going to be relatively bearable. But if you lose hope and if you lose faith, then it can be thousands of times longer, a thousand, 10,000 times worse. The more you lose hope, the worse it gets. And it's really something to know, because you can say, well, I tried to do this thing and it didn't work out for me, and I don't know why, and I think I'm not going to believe that it's possible anymore. And the answer is like, yeah, maybe you got unlucky, but maybe you lost hope. Maybe you hesitated. Maybe you're like, oh man, I don't know if this is right. I don't know if I'm really doing the right thing here. And that hesitation keeps you in the wilderness longer. Again, there's a quote: "A man who hesitates is a lost man," and that's absolutely true, because when you construct this plan originally, you have to stick to it wholeheartedly. Even if it's not completely perfect, you have to sit there and conceptualize and imagine the best possible end goal and the way in which that can be brought about, and you have to just wholeheartedly go all in on it. And obviously, whenever you learn something new, then you can implement that back in. You shouldn't just only stick with that plan, forever, of course. But but you have to just go. You have to just 100% um go all in, and that's part of the having hope that if you do that, then it'll bring about, a transformation in you and a transformation in the world that makes it closer to the ideal and the kingdom of heaven, respectively. Okay, so now I want to talk about faith. So we had hope, and now we have faith. And so what's hope? And how is it different than faith? Well, hope is more about the future, and it's more, yeah, it's more about what's going to happen. But faith is saying, I don't know that this is true, but I hope it is. So it's they're very similar, but faith is a little bit different. And one of the things that Christ says in the New Testament is that if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, then you can move. Then you can say to this mountain, "Move," and it will move. And that's an extraordinary statement, but I think it's true. And we see this in the Tower of Babel. We see God Himself says, look what they've done. Look what they've managed to do, together. They've managed to build this huge tower, even though it's a leaning tower, and even though it probably collapsed. He says, well, if they can do this, then what can't they do? There's nothing they can't do. And I think that's true. I genuinely think it's true. Firstly, that if you have hope and if you have faith, then you can bring about something meaningful. But I think that is exponentially true when other people are brought into the equation. Two people are better than one, and three better than two, and all the way up. And so, maybe at some point that's not true. Um, but generally speaking, the more people that you have that are genuinely aligned with the truth and that genuinely have hope and faith in the structure of reality and what will result from them making the proper sacrifices, there's the more of those types of people that you have in your life, the further you're going to get. And it's that simple. And so this is kind of where you get that element of luck in success is that you find the right person at the right time. But I mean, do you ever I mean, pretty much you either find the right person at the right time whenever you're at the lowest moment in your life and you need it the most, or when you're already making progress and you've been looking for these types of people and you've been searching for them and you've been putting in the work, um showing the world what it is that you've been doing, and people see your work and they go, okay, this guy, I would enjoy working with him, and I would enjoy going on a journey with this person, and I can assist him and he can assist me. And this is partially the idea of marriage. It's the idea that, life is better together. And so this hero's journey, on its own and by yourself, it can be quite meaningful, but it's immediately and exponentially better when you have a partner along the way. And marriage is kind of the ultimate unification between two people. And so one of the interesting things is that in the Bible, it from my knowledge, it never actually, or it very rarely uses a Hebrew word, or I don't know about the New Testament, but at least in the Old Testament, it never actually uses a Hebrew word that means, like, literally that means to sleep with someone. Instead, it uses the word know, which is like literally knowledge. And I think it's experiential knowledge. And so, of course, we all know that it's referring to sleeping with somebody, but it isn't, you know, marriage isn't seen as this arbitrary, connection between two people where they're simply just fulfilling each other's desires. It's not what it is at all. It's knowing one another on a very deep and personal level. And that's why this adventure is so much better with somebody else. And you have to if you want the best results, you have to tell your partner everything about you. Essentially, you have to fully know each other, and then you can both make the best moves forward. And of course, there's faith and there's hope and there's an adventure in that. I mean, only telling the truth. That's going to be a really interesting adventure, especially in a marriage, because what it means is that every time you mess up, or every time your partner messes up, you tell the truth every single time. You don't lie. And, of course, in the short term, that might have negative consequences. People want to be like, "Oh man, why are you calling me out? Or why are you saying that? Why are you being so harsh and so rude?" But in the long term, you're right. And if they take your advice, even if it's harsh, then it's going to bring about a positive transformation in their lives, and it's going to be of a major benefit to them. But it also means that in the future, people can trust you. And so, the hero's journey, um this idea that if you tell the truth, and if you maintain hope in the structure of reality, and if you make the ultimate sacrifice, that things will be better. It isn't obvious in the beginning that that's what's happening. And so that's why you have to have faith, because you have to have faith that the terrible things that immediately result from going on this adventure, you have to have faith that those things are good, or that at least they're all going to culminate in the future, and your work is going to compound in the future and be of future benefit. And so it's also this idea of wealth beyond that of material wealth. It's this idea that, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourself treasure in heaven, where moth and rust do not corrupt and where thieves do not break and steal. And then Christ says this, another amazing thing: for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And so it's a beautiful illustration of the idea that there's wealth beyond that of material wealth. There's wealth that's beyond money, that's beyond food, that's beyond clothes, that's beyond what you'll drink. And this wealth is sort of like reputation. And so how do you store wealth and reputation? Well, you be honest. You make the ultimate sacrifice. You sacrifice uh, what is insufficient in yourself. And when you make that sacrifice, and you do unto others as you would have them do unto you, or you turn the other cheek, or you go the extra mile, or you give your coat whenever someone sues you for your tunic, then you're storing that wealth in the future. And so really what that means is that whenever you give away to the poor, whenever you give your tithing at church, you're not actually losing anything in it. In fact, in the long term, you're actually gaining something. And again, it isn't obvious that that's true, but try it out and see if it's true, for yourself. And so that's what you have to maintain faith and hope in that. And so how can you maintain faith and hope? Well, sometimes it's not obvious that what you're doing is correct. And it's not obvious that you're going to be rewarded for your works. And so your faith has to be grounded in something that is beyond you. right? Beyond what you say you're going to do. It has to be deeper than that. And we see this in marriage. People will say, oh, we don't need to be legally married because, we love each other, and because I know that we're never going to leave each other. But, there's going to come a point where the desert is worse than the slavery, where divorce is easier than staying married. There's very likely going to be a point in your marriage where that is likely to occur. And so, you know, when you get to that point where divorce is easier than trying to get through this rough time in your marriage, what makes you think that you're going to maintain faith and hope in what could possibly come of it? And and so your marriage has to be grounded in something more than in your word. And so you want everything you can to be a force field that's keeping your marriage together. And so, a few things off the top of my head, children especially, getting legally married, getting married in front of your family, in front of people, and the more people, the better, right? And so it's like it'll be worse for your children. There's going to be a lot of legal trouble, and people are going to lose respect for you, and they're not going to be able to trust you in the future. And so you fortify your marriage and all these things. And I think that goes for things other than marriage. You have to fortify your hope in something beyond you. And so that's why um imitation, acting out what someone else acted out, or seeking advice from the elders, or benefiting from the mode of being that's presented in your tradition. That's why those things are so incredibly useful, because you aren't doing everything on your own. And so again, it's this idea that you shouldn't do this on your own, but you should have other people helping you and assisting you in this journey. And so you use that tradition to orient yourself properly in the world. And so you're not just placing your faith in the structure of reality itself, but now you're also placing your faith in tradition. And you're having faith that what worked for other people is going to work for you. And so I think that ultimately culminates in the story of Christ in the Gospels, because Christ, he presents the ultimate sacrifice, right? His whole life. And he's a good person. He's the only perfect person, and yet he experienced the worst possible death, and that was followed by a descent into hell itself. And he maintained faith, and he maintained hope, and he conquered the grave, and he resurrected. And so that's the ultimate archetypal story. And that story happens at the micro level, but it also happens at the macro level. And of course, at the macro level, whenever you've been in the desert for years or just a long time, and it isn't obvious that things are getting better, and maybe they actually are getting worse, then you have to maintain hope, and that what worked for others is also going to work for you. And that is faith, and that is hope, because even though, someone else did it, it's not obvious that it's going to work for you. Every person is different, at least slightly different. They vary um slightly, and some more than others. And that's actually a good thing, because that means the earth has diversity. And I mean, think for a second that, what would happen if this path was, presented as something that was guaranteed. It's not even guaranteed that you'll come out on the other side alive. That's not promised. It's not it's not obvious that that's going to happen. And so you that's why you have to have faith, because you're different and you have a different ideal, and you've had a different upbringing, and you're psychologically different than other people, and you have different talents and you have different gifts, and you look different and you act different and you talk different and you think different. And so you have to have faith in the fact that it's going to work for you. But imagine imagine if you knew it was going to work, right? It's sort of this idea like, oh man, I wish I knew how I was going to die, or I wish, I could predict what was going to happen in the future of my life. But the second things become predictable, they also simultaneously become boring. And so the fact that you don't know that this is going to work out, specifically in your favor in the end, is, maybe it's a good thing actually. Maybe it's good that you have to have faith, and that it isn't full confidence, and that you don't know exactly what's going to happen. I mean, maybe the less you know, the better. I mean, obviously, you have to have a vision of the future, and you have to have faith that what you're doing is correct, and you have to have a plan. And so you need to know something in order to come through on the other end. But you know, the mere fact that you don't know everything doesn't seem to me in the slightest to necessarily be something bad. And of course, the hero's journey in part is about experiencing life and collecting data, um, and learning and transforming and becoming less ignorant. And ignorance is bad because it means that, the more ignorant you are, the more pits you fall into, and the less ignorant you are, the less pits you fall into. But there's also this adventurous aspect of not knowing what's going to happen. And that's what makes it an adventure, and that's what makes it meaningful. It If you do something that's predictable and that is guaranteed to work, it you might get the result, but the result doesn't have a value, right? You didn't work for it. You didn't make a genuine sacrifice for it, and you didn't struggle to get it. And so again, the the material reality of an object doesn't give it a meaning. It's human perception that gives it meaning. And so, and I think that's true for almost everything. And so that's why, whenever you're married, or if you have friends, or even normal objects in your life like electricity and electronics, and cold water for everybody, and showers for everybody, and all this food and all this abundance, it's very easy to overlook all of this and to say, oh yeah, well, I mean, it's just normal life. But this isn't normal life. Our lives, at least in the West, are not normal lives. We are the exception in human history. And so it's so easy to be ungrateful when things go wrong. But what we have to do is we have to look around and we have to realize, like, look at all this look at all this stuff that we have. And look, I look around my room, and there's so much here that it would take me hours to genuinely go through all of it, and to genuinely fully appreciate every single thing that I have. And and it isn't obvious that state is the optimal state of mankind. It isn't obvious that man was built to live in a predictable environment. It's rather the contrary is actually quite obvious. Whenever you see people that have, everything they wanted to, like materially wise, they have all the money in the world, they have all this. You see, they they either end up depressed, or they continue to work. They continue to do what they did. Even like you can see this with fighting, with boxing and MMA. You see in basketball and all and sports, and these physical activities particularly, you see that people, they simply fight, well into a too old age in order to do that. And I think that's emblematic of humanity's desire. And you might be like, well, why? I mean, these guys, they did all these fights, they won all these fights, they got, all these knockouts, all this money, all this fame. Why do they keep doing it? And it's like, it's not enough. It's not one adventure isn't enough, right? And so life is meant to be this long, continuous adventure full of many micro adventures, which are also full of micro adventures. And the second you get comfortable, the second you stop, the second you say, all right, this is I'm sufficient now. That arrogance, that pride to say that you're good enough. The second that happens, that's when you see people's downfall. And so, it isn't obvious to draw the line, when should you stop doing something? When should you stop fighting? When should you stop making YouTube videos? I mean, maybe YouTube videos is different. Maybe you don't have to stop doing that. It's not that difficult. But you get that point. And so there's also this humility aspect in it, and asking yourself, what's the smallest step that you're genuinely willing to take forward? And that's all embedded in that having hope. Maybe you get a setback, maybe something happens to you, maybe you get an injury and you can't do the same things anymore. And so you have to have humility. You have to be poor in spirit enough to realize your limitations, but to also push yourself beyond your limitations. Because in order to truly grow, you have to push yourself beyond your limit. You have to go into the unknown. You have to explore it, and you have to risk failing. You have to risk losing. You have to risk, losing that money, or you have to risk losing that job. And that risk is ultimately, it's a sacrifice. And so all through this journey, it's immensely important. I cannot state this enough, how important it is to maintain hope. Because if you lose hope, then it's all going to collapse, and it's all going to turn to hell. And that'll be your fault. But it's a good thing to know that not only is the hero's journey, something that can work for you, but it's also along the way you're in control, right? And so even though random things can happen to you, like the death of a family member, or you get hit in a car accident or something like that, even though these random things can happen to you, a lot of the journey is up to you. It's up to your choices. And that means that if you fail, then you failed. And if you succeed, then you succeed. And it's a great thing to know that if you're struggling with something and it's not working, that it's your fault. It's a good thing to know that it's your fault. There was this patient, I don't remember whose patient she was, but she went to some form of therapy, I believe. And she went up to the therapist and she said that I hope that what's wrong with me is my fault. And the therapist was like, why do you wish it was your fault? And she was like, well, if it's my fault, then that means I can change something about it. But if it's something inherent in the structure of reality itself, then that would be a bad thing, because it means that I can't change it. And so what's presented in the biblical narrative constantly is that man is made in the image of God, and God created the structure of reality itself. And so, what that means is that human beings are not, like the playthings of the gods, in the sense that, they're endlessly controlled and they have no free will, right? They have free will, they have free reign, they have dominion, they have the ability to subdue the world. And that doesn't mean to exploit the world. That's not what that means at all. What it means rather is that it means that you have a responsibility to take care of the world and to take care of yourself. One of of Jordan B. Peterson's rules, I believe in his first book, 12 Rules for Life, An Antidote to Chaos. One of his rules is treat yourself like you're somebody worth taking care of. And I think there was this incredibly interesting study that found that people, um, let's say, well, people in general are more willing to, take care of somebody else in a and they're more willing to help somebody else than they are to help themselves. And so one of the very interesting things about humanity is that it isn't obvious that pride is, the reigning sin. And instead, I think the sin is not considering oneself worthy of something. And having humility is incredibly important. And there's reasons to have humility. There's reasons to be poor in spirit. But that does not mean that you consider yourself unworthy of something. It doesn't mean that you consider yourself, lesser than you truly are. That's not what humility is. I really like the definition of humility. That's humility is having an accurate view of oneself, not having a non-accurate view of oneself. And what that means is that you have to know your own limitations and know what you're capable of. And if you know what you're capable of, then you can ultimately place your faith in the structure of reality and place your faith in your own integrity and have faith that if you make the ultimate sacrifice, if you give your best, not any less and not any more, then you are going to make it through on the other side. And so that's why it's important to have hope and to have faith in the very structure of reality itself.